Great to be here in front of people that I know quite well. I've got 15 minutes, so I'm going to keep it quite short. The presentation is available to everybody afterwards, and I'm happy to take questions during the question and answer sessions or afterwards as well. I'm going to give you a very quick overview of BRE, who we are, what we do, go into the certification process, not just certification for businesses but also for individuals, because that sometimes gets lost within organisations. Go through the whole certification process, and also then the transition from PAS 1192 to ISO 19650, because it still is very much in its infancy, 19650. So there will be a lot of reference here to PAS 1192 because BRE as a certified body see that as being an integral part of ISO 19650 in the future as well. So you'll see reference to that during the slide presentation. Just in terms of who BRE are, so Building Research Establishment, we're in existence almost 100 years. We're a multidisciplinary organisation involved in the built environment, right through from education and training, research and innovation, right through to testing and certification within the built environment. So you may be aware of brands such as BRE, for example, which is the environmental assessment methodology. That's an accreditation scheme owned by ourselves. These are probably the four key pillars. Where knowledge, which I think is a huge part of certification, competency within businesses, right through to quality in terms of standards and testing and certification, and right through to learning. To me, certification is not about a necessary evil to win a contract. It's about continual improvement in an organisation and embedding culture and best practice in that organisation. And that's the key focus of what we do as a certified body. These are kind of areas that we're located, or these are kind of the areas of expertise. So obviously BIM is the main focus of today, and I think sometimes BIM is used quite loosely as a term. But the other key thing in an Irish context is why we're in Ireland is because of Brexit. So one of the main things we're setting up here is a fire test facility north of Dublin, so that should be operational by the end of the year. And we'll also be doing other testing as well in the near future. In terms of global aspect, and Geraldine touched in terms of BIM in an international context, we operate in 80 countries, and we're adopting and implementing BIM in countries such as Malaysia, Chile and New Zealand. So it is international. It's not UK centric. It's not Irish-centric, this is internationally. And when Mark speaks, he'll probably speak from an RPS group perspective, like RPS are a global organisation. So it's right through from SMEs, right through to multinational organisations. In terms of, this isn't meant to be blockbuster, but it's the BRE Academy. It starts off with the training side through the academy, education and training, upskilling within an organisation that ultimately leads through to certification and having the best people in your organisation to manage those processes, whether it's ISO 9001, ISO 19650, ISO 27001. So the next two slides are focused on just what types of certification there are, and I mentioned at the outset, it's not just certification for businesses but also for individuals. So some companies may not have a requirement to be BIM certified at a company level, but they may want people in the organisation to actually have a level of competency that they can walk into any specific project worldwide and have that level of competency they can demonstrate to their end client. So certification for individuals is part of what we do as well as certification for businesses. So from an individual perspective, we offer informed professional certification and also certified practitioners, and I know there's one or two people in the room that have gone through this process. So that's upskilling in your organisation. And to me, it's also very important as the education aspect. I don't expect companies here potentially spending money year in, year out with training companies. Train your people up and let them train the trainers in the organisation and upskill as the company grows. From a certification perspective, there are probably, and I think Geraldine touched on this earlier on, there's three ways effectively to assess an organisation, and this is certainly from in a UK context, and I think it's going to become more and more evident here as the National Public BIM Forum is set up. One is obviously pre-qualification questionnaires, and I'm sure you've come across them in many tender contracts. Secondly is your pre-tender assessment, so from a BIM perspective, showing your BIM capability. And ultimately then having a global certification, so whether it's in ISO 19650 with NSCI, BSI or BRE, but demonstrating that third-party competency. And that's probably the key element there, because if you have that certification piece, it sometimes gets over the hurdle of filling in a BIM capability assessment as part of your tender process. So in terms of certification for businesses, and again I emphasise at the beginning, there's reference here to PAS 1192, but will be very relevant to ISO 19650. So one is becoming prepared, actually setting up, and I'll go through the certification process later on in the slide presentation, and then also then actually the business becoming certified as well. And something I've noticed as well, particularly with the advent of ISO 19650, and Geraldine mentioned about how it's closely aligned to ISO 9001. So there are many organisations here, SMEs, multinational, that probably have a number of ISO certifications. So long term, it makes sense to have that as an integrated management system and having it as a combined audit programme. So if you're not looking at that now, it's probably something you should consider in the near future, having that combined audit approach to your management system, which incorporates BIM as well. And I think that brings collaboration within organisations as well, because we all work in construction, and one of the biggest criticisms is the silo mentality. Nobody talks to each other. And I think actually ISO 19650 actually is a good way of actually bringing that collaboration close together, not just internally within organisations, but also your supply chain as well. So in terms of BIM certification, in a UK context, when PAS 1192 came out, it was very much driven by UK government in terms of UK central government contracts. You had to show some level of BIM competency in order to get on that tender framework. I know, for example, the Irish government are looking at that at the moment. So the idea behind certification is kind of get over that BIM capability. So you're not filling in those pre-questionnaires showing different levels of qualifications and competency as you go through the process. And like ourselves, probably this is the only kind of, dare I say, sales slide. Like, why would you go for certification with a third party? It's globally recognised. You're certified with a recognised certified body such as an NSAI or BRE, for example. So that's probably the main thing as well. But as I said at the very outset, to me, certification is not about just to win business, because that kind of defeats the whole purpose of certification. It's all about continual improvement. Whether it's your quality management system, your environmental management system, your BIM processes, that's what it's about as an organisation. And it has to be led from the top down. The days are gone now where leaders or directors in organisations will sign off and delegate responsibility to somebody. It has to be led from the very top down. So one of the things we would do as a certified body is looking at the company, at the people, but also the leadership within the organisation. How are they showing collaboration and leadership through the whole process as well, and demonstrating that from the very top down. So in terms of the pre-assessment certification pathway, and pre-assessment is quite important, although it's not obligatory, we would always strongly recommend to companies that they do some form of a gap analysis, whether that's with a third-party consultant or with a certified body, because that can highlight the risks within your processes. If a company is ready for the audit process, they can go straight to the formal audit process, and I'll explain that in a minute. But there may be risks highlighted within that pre-assessment, for example, such as lack of skills. So there may be an upskilling required there, or you may need to engage with a third party as part of that process as well. And once you get through those first two steps, then you start the application process. So the next two steps really is kind of completing the online application form, and this is very much a BRE process. Completing the online application, we actually do a desktop review all your processes, procedures to make sure that everything we have in place, we have a checklist to make sure, yes, you're ready for the formal audit process. And the very last process there is actually the formal audit, coming in and actually doing a formal audit on site within the organisation. And on the completion of that then, we tend to verbally say to the organisation, we've been approved for certification. Our certification report then goes through a compliance and risk. They actually review everything the auditor has done, and then you're successfully completing your certification. And like ISO, it goes through a 3-year cycle. So you have an annual visit every year in year 1 and year 2, and then in year 3 you have a recertification process as well. And I have a slide, a couple of slides later on, just what kind of questions we ask in order to, because first thing somebody probably asked me is what's the cost, how many audit days. So we have a kind of top level questionnaire, and I'll go through that with you. So in terms of the categorizations, and again, these will be relevant to ISO 19650 from a BRE perspective, but you know, we look and assess businesses according to their task team and their lead supplier. And within each of those, then we need to see that you're demonstrating capability in these areas. So for example, in task teams, looking at contribution to BIM execution plans, for example. If you then go to lead suppliers, is incorporating BIM execution plans, is recording project roles and responsibilities. So these are the key checklists we have within the process around capabilities within the team. In terms of cost, I'm happy to talk to anybody afterwards, but these are the type of questions that kind of sets out the number of audit days that an organisation will be assessed to. So number of locations to be included. That's very important. When I say locations, it's permanent locations, so it's not temporary locations that maybe some of your site managers may be working on specific projects. Centrally controlled standards, methods and processes as well. The number of disciplines within your BIM process. So an architectural practice will have a completely different scope of activity to a design or an engineering company. And then the approximate number of employees involved in the BIM processes and responsibility. So you may have 100 staff, but maybe only 10 staff are involved in BIM processes day to day, or there may be a staff that maybe only spends 30% of their time. So all of that is used to calculate how many audit days we need to be on site to carry out the formal assessment review. So in terms of, and I think Geraldine touched on this in one or two slides, so not to repeat myself, but there are basically two technical committees that kind of drafted documents for the ISO 19650. You've got the ISO International Technical Committee, and you've got the British Standard 555 Committee. So in terms of the ISO side, you've got ISO 19650-1, which is basically around the concepts and principles, how you actually implement ISO 19650, and then ISO 19650-2, which is basically the delivery phase of the assets. From a UK perspective, there are three documents involved. One is the transition guidance, and that's really the transition guidance for PAS 1192 to ISO 19650. And then the next two documents are the same as what the ISO Technical Committee have effectively produced as well. I wanted to just touch on then as well, there are a lot of standards out there and a lot of choice for organisations, so you have to make sure you choose the right standard that best meets your organisation's requirements. So, as we mentioned earlier, PAS 1192 will effectively become dormant, but these are the standards under the British Technical Committee in terms of what are required. So ISO 19650 obviously will be the pillar going forward. Geraldine touched on it in an Irish context in terms of, in order for the ISO committee to appease the member nations, every country has the option to adopt their own national Annex SL clause. So you could potentially have 80 different national Annex XL clauses. What we would hope from a BRE perspective, and I know from other certified bodies from speaking to them, is that if there are leaders in this area in different countries that adopt the national SL clause, the hope would be that maybe other countries would follow that clause as well, so we have maybe more alignment as opposed to different SL clauses across the world. And outside of these, not to kind of wreck your head, but there are other standards linked to ISO 19650 as well. So these are all standard on tolerances, element name and scale within the BIM process. So there's, as you can see, there are a huge selection of standards there. So the key thing is when you're, as an organisation, going through the certification process, is not to get lost in what the main focus of the business is, because there are so many different choices out there for companies to choose from. The last two slides, what I want to focus on is PAS 1192 and the transition to ISO 19650. But I want to speak to it from a BRE perspective. So we're probably slightly adopting a different approach to what Geraldine mentioned, how NSCI are basically certifying to ISO 19652. In effect, we still see PAS 1192 as a robust system for certifying to BIM certification. So we're just starting off a pilot scheme at the moment with 20 companies across the UK and Ireland, and I know Mark Costello from RPS Group is going to speak after this about their certification process and what their plans are for the future. So we still want to incorporate some of the best elements of PAS 1192 when we're looking at ISO 19650-2, and that's something we will continue to do for this foreseeable future. So we're planning probably late August to start this process, the transition period, have it completed with 20 companies. And then once the pilot scheme is completed, because that will actually show us how we're actually improving as a certified body. You know, the important thing with us with this transition process is getting feedback from customers as well, and how we can improve as an auditing body as well, because it's just as important for us to listen to our customers. So when that applies, then we will probably still include elements of PAS 1192 as part of the ISO 19650 process, along with the relevant national Annex SL clause as well. So as I mentioned at the outset, like we're working on this in countries such as Malaysia, Chile and New Zealand as well. Each of them have got their own specific requirements as well. So as I mentioned, late August is when we're going to start accepting new applications for the new ISO 19650 standard. And that's it. So thank you very much for your time.